What's going on, everybody? My name's Jordan. I'm the head coach here at SaberSim, and I've been playing DFS for over 8 years and coaching and creating content about DFS for over 3. And in this video, I'm going to break down the 3 most common mistakes I see from DFS players that I've seen time and time again over that period of time playing DFS and helping other players get better at playing DFS. So let's go ahead and just dive in with mistake number 1. Now, mistake number 1 is poor bankroll management and contest selection, and this one is by far the most common mistake I see most DFS players make, and in fact, it is more common with players playing with smaller bankrolls. I think most of this comes from the fact that people overall underestimate the variance of DFS, the swings of DFS, and how much time it can just take to realize your ROI. But I see this time and time again where players are overextending themselves on any given slate or entering their money for that particular slate into just bad contests and bad contest selection overall. I think some of the contest selection issues here can just come from the fact that the DFS lobby is pretty big, especially on DraftKings. There are so many different contests to play. You have to make some decisions. It's hard to know what to do. And I think, again, with the bankroll management side of this here, I think it comes a lot of times from a lack of understanding about how high variance actually is in DFS and how long it can take to realize your ROI, even if you are a profitable player. Now, SaberSim's DFS profit plan is really the perfect answer to this. It's available on our YouTube channel here at the top. Start winning more with our DFS profit plan. I will link that in the description of this video as well. This is a contest bankroll simulated answer to the problem of bankroll management and contest selection, and a contest selection and bankroll management system that we actually developed by simulating out playing different contests and managing a bankroll over that period of time. And this is designed to maximize your profit while minimize the risk that you are taking on. But honestly, I think most of the time what people think are issues with their process or their lineup construction or virtually anything else that you can talk about when it comes to DFS strategy is actually a bankroll management and contest selection problem caused by either people playing harder contests than they need to, or playing far too much of their bankroll and never really giving themselves time to realize their ROI with an otherwise profitable process. Now, mistake number 2 here is mismanaging the balance of projection or scoring upside, ownership, and correlation in your lineups that you're actually entering. And this is definitely the biggest mistake I've seen as it relates to lineup construction with people's DFS processes. And there's really 2 sides to the coin here. I think there's 2 mistakes. One mistake you can make here is playing lineups that are just that are projected too highly, or put a better way here, do not have enough correlation or low enough ownership to actually be successful in the contests. I think this definitely happens very commonly for beginner players. I made this mistake often when I was just starting out, but you play lineups, you build lineups probably with a traditional optimizer in this case here, and you pick some of the top lineups, and what you are playing is you are playing lineups that are better for cash games, lineups that probably have some decent min cash equity, but if you are playing GPPs, if you are playing tournaments, you need lineups that can win the contest. You will just slowly bleed out to the rake of the contest if you are constantly playing to min cash. You need to build lineups that have upside, that are going to be lower owned, so there are less lineups competing with you when your lineup scores highly, and lineups that are correlated, so the probability of your lineup succeeding as a whole is more likely. I think also you can get this a little bit with people that are playing too much of their bankroll, and I think this is going to be a common trend throughout this video, is that some of these other mistakes also, they tend to connect. I think people playing too much of their bankroll are playing bad contests each night. Maybe if you're overextending yourself and you're dumping a lot of money into a really expensive single entry that you shouldn't even be playing, you are going to be more inclined to build a lineup that is likely to min cash, because the loss aversion, you don't want to break that slate. You don't want to get nothing back. So you build a lineup that's a little more cashy, a little more likely to min cash, and destroy any of your chance of actually ever taking that tournament down. But on the flip side of this mistake is the opposite problem, and that is sacrificing far too much projection to build lineups that are low owned or are perfectly correlated. I see this very often in NFL in particular, where you have players building lineups that are just these, like, in theory, gorgeously correlated lineups with the QB +2 with one run back, and then the two other skill position players in the lineup are also playing each other, and then the running back is correlated with the same team defense. You have this lineup that in theory looks great, but actually has sacrificed a ton of projection to have actually gotten there. And this mistake, while I don't know if it's more common objectively, I think there are probably more DFS players playing lineups that are just too cashy in general in the lobbies. I actually think this side of the mistake is more common amongst DFS players who are serious about DFS and serious about getting better at DFS. I think thinking about ownership and correlation is something that can kind of be endlessly overcomplicated, to the extent where you are trying to outsmart everybody at the expense of your own lineups, basically. You're just doing too much with where you're taking stands. It also, if you are, I've made this mistakes for years. If you are like serious about getting better at DFS, it is a peer-to-peer game. We are all competitive. You want to beat the field. It feels good to have that feeling of I've outsmarted everybody by playing this low-owned team or this low-owned player without realizing that, you may have sacrificed far more than you needed to for the contest that you're playing to actually be competitive in that contest. Most of the time, it does not take a lineup sacrificing an enormous amount of projection compared to whatever the optimal is for that particular slate to get very cute and unique with your overall lineup construction. Now, I am sure you're watching this and saying right now, okay, that sounds great, Jordan. You're right. I do struggle with that. But what is the answer to that problem? How do you actually balance projection, correlation, and ownership in your lineup builds? And in my opinion, answering that question correctly is probably actually one of the hardest problems in DFS to solve. So I don't fault anyone out there for making this mistake. It comes up. It is very common because of how hard this problem is to solve. In terms of answering this question, I simply cannot speak highly enough about SaberSim's SaberScore. I think in the industry, amongst even other private processes that I've heard from people coming to me to ask for advice about their process of ways they've sorted and scored their lineups, I have never seen anything better than SaberScore at solving this particular problem. And the reason this works so well is because of the way that SaberSim builds your lineups. When you build your lineups on SaberSim, we are going through our play-by-play simulations of each game on the slate, and each lineup in your pool is the optimal lineup that could have been built for the way that the slate played out. So the lineups themselves are the best lineup that could have happened for a slate. So you know that these lineups already have some upside to them. And then we score these lineups to identify the best set of them from the pool based on the contest you are playing. So for a large slate like we have today, for theoretically a large field contest, we are going to balance and score lineups based on the projection, based on the raw scoring potential, the 99th percentile of this lineup in this case, and then the ownership. And we have rigorously back-tested these different metrics to figure out what specific settings here are the highest return on investment for different contests here. I have tried to iterate on this on my own process here. I have at times used different systems for scoring my own metrics, and I have never found anything, frankly, that has done a better job of doing the balance of correlation, projection, and ownership than SaberSim's SaberScore. And I think the best part about this is that even once you've figured out a process that works pretty well for doing this on your own, the challenge is scaling that to account for slate size, contest, and sport. Let's say you found something that works pretty good for medium-sized baseball slates. It is hard to know what to do when you are playing small field single entry versus when you are playing larger field 150 max contests. And then how do you scale that when you suddenly have a 3-game slate versus a 13-game slate? And then maybe you want to play some golf. How does that system that you were using there for baseball work in golf, where correlation all of a sudden becomes pretty much a non-factor? And how do you then balance the projection and ownership in golf versus baseball? A lot of this heavy lifting has been done for you already with the way that SaberSim builds lineups. So if you are already using SaberSim, you're probably already taking advantage of this. The easiest thing that you can do in this case is get out of the way. I think a lot of times, because players that have been playing DFS for a long time know that this is a challenging problem to solve, you approach SaberSim like it is any other optimizer and then reattempt to solve this problem, where in reality, 80% of it has been solved for you. There are ways you can iterate on this. We have a lot of other videos on our YouTube channel about that, but the SaberScore and the way that we use our simulations to build this pool of lineups is a massive step in the right direction in solving this very common mistake. Now, finally, mistake number 3, and this one's kind of a more macro process mistake, but the mistake here is not sticking to a consistent process and overcomplicating your process for building your lineups. And this one also goes pretty hand in hand with the first mistake here, because I see this most commonly from people who are overextending themselves and not managing their bankroll well. It's easy to get frustrated when you are losing then over a period of a small sample size and feeling like suddenly you need to change stuff. You need to add things into your process, or you need to completely rework what you are doing. And most of the time that comes from the fact that it's been a 1 week or a 2 week period or even a month-long period of just playing too much bankroll each night, and it feels like it's time for something to change. So why is this actually a bad thing? Why is it a mistake to be constantly changing up your process? Well, first, if you are changing up your process constantly, you're never going to have an actionable sample size of data to review and analyze and see if anything was working. I would prefer to have a losing season where I did a consistent process night after night so I can tell what was working and what wasn't at the end of the season versus a break-even year where I changed up my process 8, 10, 12 different times or something like that. And while yes, I might have broken even on the year, I can't really tell what worked throughout the season. Every single sample size of each individual process I was using throughout that season got switched up after 2 or 3 weeks. And even if I had success over a 2 or 3 week period or didn't have success over a 2 or 3 week period, I have no idea if that was actually working well during that time or if that was just variance. And you play this whole season, break even or maybe even profit or whatever, and then you don't really know what actually worked or what didn't. And even worse, when you go to make changes in the future, you don't have anything to compare them to. You don't have a way of saying, I made this change at the start of this year to do this, and it made an improvement in my top 1% equity by this much year over year or anything. So sticking to a process gives you actionable sample sizes to review and analyze. But second, efficiency matters in DFS. And if you're the type of player that after you lose for a period of time, starts adding more and more things to your process, and then you lose a little bit more and you add more and more things to your process and have a tendency to get a large, bloated, inefficient process that takes a lot of times to do. Speaking from experience, I have been that player before. This is going to affect you here. The main ways this is going to affect you is one, it's just going to become a lot more difficult to get through the process of building your lineups. It's more likely that you are going to make a mistake during that lineup building process or end up with a DFS process where you are double counting things. This can be things where you are double counting certain factors or stats that ultimately affect a player projection or something like that. Or you could be double counting the way that you are navigating ownership or adding, taking into account ownership in your process in a way that you end up sacrificing too much projection. The larger and less efficient your process is, the harder it is to be critical and analytical about the different parts of your process and how they are working together. Second, on a more practical level, the longer your process takes and the less efficient it is to do, the slower you are going to be to react to news. Different sports news will be a factor differently. In NBA, it is massively important. And in fact, I think one of the most important things to a healthy NBA DFS process is efficiency. In a sport like golf, that might not be as much the case. If you want to spend hours and hours on your golf process, that's totally fine, probably. Baseball is kind of in the middle, but ultimately every sport is going to have those slates where you do have some breaking news that you need to react to and probably rebuild your entire lineup pool. And the less efficient your process is, the harder it is to be able to actually do that. A good exercise I've gone through when I've struggled with this at times during my DFS career here is to take a given sport and write down on a piece of paper each step that it would take you to actually build your lineups for that particular slate. And for each step you ultimately have, you should be asking yourself 2 questions. One is, what value does this add? You should be able to clearly articulate that doing this thing, researching this, setting this way, looking into this, is adding a certain amount of value to the lineups you end up producing. And then the second question is this a time-efficient way of doing this thing? Now, that second question is going to be different for different players. If you are a full-time DFS professional, the bar for is this time efficient is probably going to be a bit lower there because you have the time to do the thing. If you are a DFS hobbyist and you have about 30 minutes to spend on DFS every day, you need to be a little bit more protective over that time and asking yourself, is this a time-efficient way to research this thing or do this different thing, is going to be a bit of a higher bar that those things need to clear. And overall, when I've done this exercise with my DFS process in the past, I'm pretty aggressive and I put the bar really high for adding value and being time efficient each step of my process, and try to overall keep a lean and efficient process that I can practice night after night and give myself time to realize the ROI and the EV that process creates. SaberSim does make this much easier to keep and maintain a lean and efficient process because of all the things that it is automating or just making extremely easy to do in the process. I mentioned before here, answering the question, or at least providing a head start at answering the question of balancing projection, ownership, and correlation is huge. Min Uniques makes it extremely easy to diversify your lineups quickly. We have probably one of the most effective and efficient late swap tools on the market, and even the process of getting your lineups into your contests is much easier with SaberSim's entry editor. So all of these tools can make it a lot easier here to keep and maintain that lean and efficient process there. When I do see this mistake within the SaberSim community, I think it often comes from a lack of understanding here about how certain things are working and where things are taken into account in the process and where are opportunities to add value. So I would check out videos on our YouTube channel here. I have a video recorded for every single sport, every single season, about the way that I'm building my lineups using our tools for that particular season. And you can see these are generally pretty efficient processes, right? Our video for how I'm doing my baseball process for this season, there's one here, 23 minutes. And there's another one here that was about 30 minutes. For golf this season, about a 24-minute process. This is even when I'm explaining my process going through. A NASCAR video here that is about 15 minutes or so, and that's about how long I spend building my lineups for each slate. So if you're unsure how you can be making your process more efficient within SaberSim, I'd check out those videos there on our YouTube channel. And that's it. Those are the 3 most common mistakes I see people make when playing DFS, and our recommendations on how to avoid them or how to fix them. Again, just to summarize, the first one here is poor bankroll management and contest selection. And the best advice I have there is following SaberSim's DFS profit plan, which was literally created to solve this problem, and most importantly, sticking with it. It's very easy, and I see a lot of people watch this video and put it into practice for a week or two and then fall off and start overextending themselves, maybe on a slate you were really excited to play. It is just very important to stick with that profit plan over the long term. The second issue is a lineup construction one, and it is mismanaging projection, correlation, and ownership in your lineups here. The balance between those 3 factors, and taking it one step further, extrapolating that balance out to different sports, different contest types, different slate sizes. I, again, can't say enough about SaberScore in terms of giving you a head start at navigating that. I think that answers probably 80 to 90% of the question there that you have to figure out by taking our simulated optimal lineups here and then sorting them based on those different factors there. Just does a ton of work. Frankly, I would not have a great answer on how to solve this problem on any other tool. I think it is the most challenging question to answer in DFS. I think if you have answered this question successfully, you are almost certainly playing profitably and have done the hardest thing that there is to do in DFS, and SaberScore just gives you a huge head start at solving that problem there. The third one here is not sticking with a consistent process or overcomplicating your process over the long term. And again, I think this happens most commonly with people that are already overextending their bankroll and getting frustrated over small sample sizes. But it is very important to make sure your process stays lean and efficient so that you can do it quickly to react to news, and so you are not double counting or putting yourself in a position to make mistakes. And also so that at the end of using a consistent, lean, and efficient process over a period of time, you have an actionable sample size of data to actually see if what you were doing was working, and when you do make changes, to see how much that improved or set your process back. I hope this was a helpful video. If you have any other questions for me about this content here or the rest of the lineup building process on SaberSim, you can always reach out in our SaberSim Discord server or by emailing us at support@sabersim.com. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and as always, good luck.